Hi, Rachel. Thanks for joining us.
Heyo, thank you so much for having me on.
I'm really excited to have you on the show today. How you feeling?
I'm good. I'm good. How about you?
Can't complain. Life is good.
Right on. I'll take it. Yes.
All right. I love it. Okay. So, folks, today we have Rachel Grant joining us on the SHAIR podcast. Rachel wants to put a stop to survivors of abuse feeling broken, unflexible, and absolutely frustrated because it seems nothing they do is helping. Whenever I hear stories of survivors giving up, falling deeper and deeper into despair, or worse, being further traumatized by people who are supposed to help, I get so upset. It almost reminds me of my past and how excruciating life was for 20 plus years. I was definitely convinced there was no way out of the pain, constant instability, and feeling of worthlessness. Sound about right, Rachel?
Mm, yeah. I'm just sitting here really taking that in. It's interesting how, you've written things, and I wrote that a while ago, and I don't think I've ever heard anyone read it out for me or in that way. And I just found myself really connecting to it in a way that I haven't in a while. So thank you for that. That was really interesting.
Well, sometimes, and that's a lot of where the work begins too. We internalize a lot of things. And until we actually either put it on paper, verbalize it, right, communicate with others, right, the healing doesn't begin until that starts to happen. And I guess
Yeah.
playing the tape back a little bit takes you back. And the reason why I read those sections
Yeah.
of your website is because there was two things that really caught my attention there. Number one is the excruciating life, how excruciating life was for the past 20 plus years. So there's 20 years of life experience that was heavy, that was tough for you. And then the part about the feeling worthlessness. Right.
Yeah.
So I really connected with that. And it's something that one of the main reasons why I was looking forward to this interview, because I think for so many of my listeners, we use drugs and alcohol to cope with those years of abuse or those years of trauma or those years of whatever it is that we went through. And then the feelings associated with it, the pain, the trauma, and the worthlessness. We get to that
Hmm.
point where we do not see the value in continuing to keep moving forward, for many of us to even keep living, right? So this is
Yeah.
where I'm excited to have Rachel on the show, because today we are going to be talking about surviving sexual abuse, and what that looks like for Rachel and how she helps people today. All right. So ready to get started, Rachel?
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's dive right in. So first of all, let's start by telling us what your normal daily routine looks like.
Hmm. It continues to change over the years, but at this, I just passed 40. And so it's been a good time in my life to really begin to consider what I really want my days to look like. So it's been in the past 6 months an experiment of really tweaking and changing and adjusting things from my lifestyle or schedule of, like, say, my 20s and 30 somethings to what does this 40-year-old gal need and want. And so I have made some changes in my schedule with my clients and starting work later in the day, so none of my client work starts before 10 a.m. And that
Mm.
gives me all of this luscious space in the morning to snooze or read in bed or get up and go for a walk. I've really started incorporating walking in the mornings more and more these days. I find if I just get out and I put myself first, um, that my day just goes much better. And then throughout the day, I'll have calls with my clients doing session work. I'll have wonderful opportunities like this to meet and greet, talk, and share my story and connect with other communities. Do a lot of work online in my Facebook group right now. We're growing at a pace of about 150 people a month. That's the Healing
Nice.
from Sexual Abuse Facebook group. Yeah. And it's a really great space for men and women. And I have a wonderful, amazing team of volunteers who are supporting me in that, because there's no way I could hold space for everyone who's in that community. So, and then my day ends by 5:30, and it's time to spend some time with my honey and, have some dinner, hang out, love some TV shows, and spend time with friends. So, yeah, life these days, sometimes I look around. I think that's the other thing I was connecting with when you were reading that. Oh, is that it's one of those things that I can presence the feeling of it, like I can really deeply connect with that time in my life, but it also is starting to feel distant. It's starting to
Mm.
feel like it's, and life today is kind of calm and boring and, which is everything I ever dreamed of. Just give me a boring life, please. Yeah.
So many similarities with us addicts, because
Mhm.
that's exactly what we say. We're so grateful for this boring, life filled with routine and structure.
Yeah. Yeah.
It gives so much foundation, because for many of us, that's what we crave, that stability and that structure in our lives. But we always we
Mhm.
pushed against it for years, right? I want to be
Yeah.
free. What does that
Yeah.
mean, right? I want to be free. I want to do what I want to do. And so what we don't realize is that when we make these choices to do the things that we want to do, that we take advantage of that freedom, and we start doing things that are negative, and then before you know it, our freedom is
Mhm.
gone. It's
Yeah.
completely gone, and it's being
Yeah.
controlled by something else, right? And
For
so
sure.
today, the structure that we have and the schedule and the boring life provides a lot of freedom. As a matter of fact,
Yeah.
being done at 5:30, that's a strong close, right? Like,
Right?
yeah, I like that. I was like, oh,
Yes.
5:30.
Done.
That sounds about right.
Yeah.
And I think that it's very
Yeah.
important that, that I put myself first. I like what you said, and
Mm.
scheduling your clients no earlier than 10. I don't schedule any clients before 10 a.m. And usually I try and shut it down by 6. So
Mhm.
similar sort of mindset.
Yeah.
Weekends are for the family, right? And so there is that
Nice.
really nice balance, right? That I can totally connect with you on that. And it makes all the
Mhm.
difference. That morning time is
It's
key, right?
huge. It's so
We,
huge.
yeah, so I want to dive into that a little bit further. I want you to tell us a little bit, for us, or at least for me, my spiritual connection is very important. So, how do you maintain that spiritual condition, that conscious contact you have with your higher power?
Mm. Yeah, I think it is being out in my morning walks, because for me, I work as an entrepreneur and a solo entrepreneur, right? So I have colleagues and I have assistants and people who I connect with throughout a day, but by and large, I'm here working on my own. And I was maybe about 6 or 7 months ago, I looked up one day and I was thinking, have I been outside in the last 5 days? Like, I was like, when was the last time I've been outside? Like, I really had to take a step back and think about it. I was like, oh, wait, oh, yeah, it's been like 5 days since I've actually walked out of this house. So,
Wow.
other than going to the garage, very strong introvert as well. So,
Mhm.
like it's all packaged there. But so I thought, okay, this feels, this isolating. I've had plenty, I have my friends, I have my connections but just in the day feeling like I'm in my home and not in the world. So to me, beauty, life is beauty, and connection with spirit, connection with source, with the universe, whatever you call it, for me
Mhm.
has always come back to nature. I grew up in the country. I grew up in Oklahoma, and I was running by the time I was 5 years old, like out the acre in the backyard, going down to the creek, right? And parents come, where did she go? And I'm like 5 miles away, and just roaming. And so having that time in the morning to just go out, be in nature, even just and connecting with people too, right? In my morning walk, just walking by and saying hello to people, having that little bit of human connection. I think that's what does it the most for me.
Beautiful, beautiful. I love it. So important. It's amazing how, as a child, wide open spaces, right,
Mm-hmm.
to getting locked in the house for 5 days.
I know. It's
Well, you
nuts,
have a
though, right?
dog?
I, I have a cat.
Oh,
so,
see,
so the
it's
dog,
easy
dog,
to
no
lock
animals
yourself
for
in with
you.
a cat.
I know it is, right? We're both just sitting here kind of going like, oh, who needs the world? But we do need the world. And I'm so lucky where we live. I mean, the ocean is literally right across the street. Golden Gate Park is up the way. So I have, trees and forests that I can go get lost in, or I can go sit out on the beach in the ocean. So I have all these things so accessible, right? I have no excuse, no good excuse for not getting out there and taking it in every day.
Okay. All right. So normally I ask, my next question is, how old you were the first time you drank or used drugs. And I know that that hasn't been an issue for you, but tell us a little bit about your own experience with the first time you drank or used drugs and how they made you feel.
Yeah. I can think back to when I was maybe 18. I had started, and this is certainly one of those circumstances that derives out of having been sexually abused. I
Mm-hmm.
was, we'll say, dating in very sarcastic quotation marks here,
Mm-hmm.
a 30-something-year-old guy.
Wow.
And I was 17. And I was running with him and his crew, and he, as it turns out, was smoking crack all the time.
Oh, okay.
And so this was the first time, before that I may have had like a beer or so. I smoked cigarettes here or there. I don't even think I'd had a joint before then. So this was my first kind of entry into, use of drugs and being, is it wrong to call it a culture? I don't feel like giving it that much, status, but
it's
like
it's a
drug culture.
culture. Trust me, it's a drug culture.
Yeah.
It's a
Okay,
shitty one,
cool.
but it's a drug.
Yeah, it is a culture. So yeah, so I'm in this space now, like, sitting around, hanging out, 17-year-old kid with mostly adults, 20-somethings, 30-somethings, and they're constantly getting high. And I remember the first time I tried it and just completely losing all of my senses about, like where I was and what was going on. And I was almost like I couldn't decide if it felt good or bad.
Mm-hmm.
And I do remember feeling really disconnected from everything, and I think scared in a lot of ways. When you lose that sense of I know what I'm doing and I know what's happening around me, particularly for someone who's experienced sexual abuse trauma, that's never a good thing. And so I pretty quickly was like, no. I think that's really, if I were to really think about my use of drugs and alcohol, even into the present day, like I smoke weed and whatever, um, it's it's always been one of those things where like I can take it or leave it.
Mm-hmm.
I will dabble in this. I've tried that. I've touched, okay, let's check out cocaine. Okay, let's try mushroom. Like these sorts of things.
Mm-hmm.
But it's never, I don't know why. This is something I would love to understand, because I have addictive patterns in other areas in my life. But it was never when it came to alcohol or drugs. There was always this kind of off switch. Like, okay, that was interesting, but I, don't need any more of that. Or, well, okay, I feel like I've been drinking a little bit too much. Okay, let me just like leave that off for a while. And some might tell me that's actually, I've had people say, well, Rachel, that might actually be, I have no idea. You'll know better than I do about all that. But I think it comes down to the sense of feeling in control of self.
Mm-hmm.
There's something about the use of drug or alcohol that I can enjoy that to a certain extent, but at a certain point, feeling that way like all the time, I think it was too scary for me. And so I went towards things like food, right? Or TV, or just sleep, honestly. Those were the things that I used more so to try to protect myself and numb myself out from the things that I was afraid to look at and didn't know how to handle in my life.
Well, again, it's my show is about people where the drugs and the alcohol are the ones that they use, right, to do what you're trying to do. With food, TV, and sleep, I'm just trying to numb it out. right?
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah.
find that the way that the drugs and the alcohol trigger my dopamine receptors is not what the food and the sleep, right, or the TV does. Okay,
Yeah.
so it's really almost irrelevant what the thing is outside of me that I'm
Mm-hmm.
using to fill
Yeah.
that void on the inside, right?
Yeah. That's
So,
it.
so trust me when I tell you, any addict will tell you, yeah, you're one of the lucky ones.
I
And I'm not talking about what you've gone
feel
through in
you.
your life.
No, I feel
I'm just
you.
talking,
Yeah. It's so
just coming off
true.
the drugs and alcohol. Once it's got you,
Yep. It
it's
is.
it's a beast.
It is, it's something that, so while I haven't had to battle that particular, I don't know if you'd call it a demon, but that particular thing, uh, many of my clients have.
Mm-hmm.
And it's certainly something that I stand with them in. Most of
Mm-hmm.
my clients, most of the time I won't work with somebody if they're still really, if they're not sober. If they're
Mm-hmm.
in that early stages even of sobriety, I'll usually
Mm-hmm.
offer them some other, support before we dig in to the abuse work.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think there are mixed opinions about the order of operations and these sorts of things. But I just find that it's hard. It's just really hard to do that healing work when you're still struggling with the addictions, and it deserves its own kind of time and space in order to be worked with and healed. And then sometimes you can alongside it. And it's tough. It is tough. I've had clients who they didn't even tell me, and then at the end of the program, I've said, by the way, I've stopped drinking. I'm like, I didn't know you were drinking. I don't know what that says. Maybe I'm not asking enough questions. Okay, let me add a couple of questions to my form here. So, lessons learned in the early days, right? But it still surprised me, right? That they were like, wow, just by way of doing some of this work, I was able to like give up some of those addictions or not smoke as much or these sorts of things. I've seen that happen too. So it's a tough ride, and the clients who I work with and just the people in my life who have addictions, it can be really heartbreaking because it does take so much from you so quickly.
All right. Well, we'll probably segue back into that after you tell your story. But now
Okay.
it's time for me to set you loose here, Rachel. It's time for you to
All
share
right.
your story, the
Sure.
battle against sexual abuse,
Yeah.
the wreckage it caused in your life when you hit rock bottom, and then finally your journey into recovery up until today. So, Rachel, please take it away.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And I want to just extra thank you because anytime there's somebody who's creating space for someone to speak about sexual abuse or trauma, deserves kudos. It's part of us ending a culture of silence around this. So I just thank you for that opportunity. Oh.
Well, you got it.
So where I'll start is really when I was 5 years old. I mentioned already I was growing up in Oklahoma, and I had an older brother and sister, but they were much older, 9 and 10 years older than me. So I kind of had the run of the house. Until my grandfather moved in when I was 5, and I was actually super excited about my grandfather coming to live with our family. I thought, okay, here is someone who will pay absolute total attention to me. Yes. And I would rush home from school and go straight to his room, and we'd watch TV, we'd read books, we'd hang out. And so, he just really became a comfort to me and a friend and someone who I looked forward to spend time with. Fast forward to when I was 10 years old. And one day we were sitting out on the front porch swing. That was something we did a lot together, and I loved it. I would always snuggle up really close to him. He always wore this kind of orange fuzzy sweater that I just adored and loved for whatever reason. I don't know, maybe it's because it was close to the same as my hair color. I don't know. Whatever 10-year-olds get obsessed with things, like if pretend I'm camouflaged or something. I don't know. But we were sitting there laughing and hanging out and just watching the folks in the park across the street play volleyball. And then I felt his hand reach around and grab my breast. for all that's worth, I was 10 years old. It's still my body, still my breast, but I wasn't very developed at that time. And I remember thinking that he just didn't realize where his hand was, like it was just a mistake, an accident.
Yep.
So I started to try to wiggle and adjust and move away, but my grandfather gripped a hold of me tighter and wouldn't let me move. And it was in that moment that I just dissociated. I didn't know that's what I was doing then, of course. I only know that now looking back. But I essentially froze and tuned out everything that was going on around me. And so there's this kind of big gap in space, which of course now, having done the work I've done, I understand more about why that is, and we can get into that later. But I did finally kind of snap back to and unfroze. And I broke away from my grandfather and ran into my parents' bedroom, actually. And, I was in that moment just scared, confused. I was crying. I still to this day always find it so fascinating how fast the mind turns on us and how quickly we turn these things on ourselves. Before, an hour had passed, I was convinced that I was bad, that I had done something to cause this, that it was all of my fault, that I was a terrible, evil person and worthless and unlovable. Like, in the span of an hour, my entire sense of who I was and what I thought home was changed. And the abuse went on for quite some time. I have kind of scattered memories of other things that happened. And one day, my mom just happened to be walking by the window that looked out onto the front porch, and she saw what he was doing. And my mom ran out onto the front porch and she yelled at me, right? "Rachel, get in the house," which, as a child, reinforced this feeling of I'm in trouble, right? Of course, as an adult, I can look at that experience now and realize that she was scared. She just wanted to get me away. She was in shock herself. I don't know what conversation she had with my dad, but they had some conversation, and within the day, my grandfather was gone. Now, they did that really well, right? My parents got him out of the house immediately, which, I'm very thankful for, because I know in the 11 years that I've been working with survivors of sexual abuse that kind of support often does not exist, more often than not, which is a shame. And they made some errors along their way in trying to support me, but for the most part, they were this was all new to them too. And so they were trying to figure it out, and they wanted me to go to counseling, but quite honestly, I was like, there's no fucking way I'm talking about this to anyone. Like, I was like, you're out of your mind, let alone a guy. Like, they put me in a room with a guy counselor. I was like, this is not happening.
Ugh. Hey, how old were you? Yeah. How long did that go on?
Oh gosh, I think I was like 11 and a half. And also, I don't usually tell, like, I really suspect that the abuse started probably closer to when I was 5 or 6. I have some memories from that time, but they're so shadow that I partly don't trust them, and they're just, and I really distinctly remember this moment when I was 10, so that's where I usually mark the beginning of the abuse, but it's likely that it had been going on for some time before that too. So here I was, 11 and a half, 12, with this thing that had happened to me, and my own refusal to talk about it wasn't doing me any good, right? I don't blame myself. I understand it, but it certainly added to the isolation. And, all of these thoughts and feelings about being worthless, being unlovable. I was confused as hell about sex, about relationships. I, very soon started having sex, with boys and girls and trying to figure it all out. And that was, starting at the age of 13. And food, as we've talked about here a little bit, like I would really I would skip school so I could eat. And I just wanted to hide my femininity. I blamed my body for what had happened. I blamed being a girl for what happened. And so anything that I could do to separate from that, later in my teen years, I would cut, not severely, but still I understood it, and I understood it as a way to try to, connect or disconnect. And so take like 16 years of this, just going on and on and on. I ended up like my first love ends up being an abusive guy, at the age of 17, 18. Quite frankly, I was abusive at that time too. I was so out of control. I had so much rage. I had so much just, I was like a feral cat. I was just like scratching at everything I could in many ways, like just trying to get anyone to stop long enough to be like, what the hell's wrong with this girl, right? And almost like force me to deal with it, because I did not have the self-agency at that age and at that time to ask for help. I just didn't have the words, and I didn't even understand what was wrong with me, really. So, fast forward to 18, I'm off to college, and I meet a guy, and we fall in love. And then about 6 months into that, he begins physically abusing me. And I was also at that age very still aggressive. And so we would get into these fights and these battles. And I really just spent the next, all of that time from 10 to about 26 in what you were talking about earlier: instability, chaos, upset, anger, suicidal, attempting suicide many times, in this relationship where I'm being verbally and emotionally and physically abused, which is not helping me at all when it comes to trying to sort out all of this. It's reinforcing, right? It's reinforcing all of the trauma messages. It's reinforcing all of the pain. It's helping me continue to sit and stew in this idea that that's all that I deserve, right? So I'm 26 years old, and I'm sitting in a new apartment, going through a divorce. And all I have at that moment is a sleeping bag and a lamp. That's it. And you can bleep this out if you like, but I had one of those oh fuck moments. I was like, wow, Rachel, just look at how you're doing. And it was really like a very crystal clear voice for me. Oh, it was like, Rachel, if you do not get your shit together, and I mean like right now, you are going to spend the rest of your life miserable, hurting, just surviving, and getting by. So I woke up the next morning obsessed. I was obsessed with trying to answer just one question. I figure if I can just answer one question, I'm going to be okay. And that one question is, how do you actually heal from sexual abuse? How? And so I started reading everything I could. I went to groups. I, went to more therapy. I started studying everything I could. I did my master's in counseling psychology, and I began to study neuroscience. And it was really when I got into the neuroscience and began to learn more and understand more about how the trauma impacts the brain and the way that we continue to respond to things, process things, how we even come to believe certain things in the first place. I realized, okay, I can draw on my background in education. So I've had many, many former lives. One of them was a preschool teacher. So I can draw my background in education and curriculum development, and then I can take my learning in my master's program and this neuroscience stuff, and all of my own experience, and I can blend it all into this crazy wild package that is all about having really simple, doable strategies that would help me to actually heal the trauma and would guarantee that I wouldn't spend the rest of my life in recovery. And so first and foremost, I was really just trying to get my shit together, quite honestly. I was It's like, what is going to help me?
Totally.
And so let me do this. Let me try that. Oh, look, I don't know how to do this. Okay, well, what do I have to learn in order to be able to do that? And so just tracking that and paying attention to that. And then later on, it really became about supporting others in that same journey. And so that's really what the Beyond Surviving method is today. It's a step-by-step process that I take men and women through all over the country, all over the world, so that they too can find that place in themselves where they get to be, that person who was supposed to be here before any of that bullshit happened to them. And that's all that I ever wanted for myself, and what I've really just gone after, and what I love just every day spending my time doing with others. Yeah.
And so I'm curious, because it's very condensed, right? So you're making a decision, right, to learn.
Mm-hmm.
But that was, that oh fuck moment, right? It just didn't happen all at once. So what was that first year of recovery? What did that look like?
Right. Well, so a lot of fumbling around. I think that because of the way my personality is, once I had that moment of enough is enough, that's really what that was for me.
Mm-hmm.
Prior to that, going through those years and years of pain and fighting and things being unstable all the time, me just waking up dreading every damn day. I'm here again? Great, awesome, let's fine. Okay. Trying everything I could to get the support that I needed, and feeling really, really, really frustrated by the lack of support that was actually available, and the kind of trite cliches that I would get back from therapists. I actually had one therapist say to me, "You're never going to be normal. This is just the way it is for you." And so I think it was those moments, that was the lighting a fire, right? What? You're crazy. I don't like that answer. Let me figure something else out. And all of that, so that when I hit that moment of enough is enough, it's almost like everything became a little academic. And without my ex-husband on the scene, it was like I had this clearing where I could see myself again. I wasn't 100% sure who I was. I had lost so much of myself. So that first year was a lot about rebuilding my connection with me. What do I like? What do I want to do? How do I want to spend my time? Instead of, oh, I better do this because right? That had been my life for 10 years. And so there was a lot in that first year that I think that was self-care, that was self-love, and then that was academic. I just kind of threw myself into these books and the reading while also doing the work alongside it. So it's in my mind, I'm trying to kind of piece it out for you. I guess is what I'm doing while I'm talking out loud, is trying to reconnect with what it felt like, because so much of it was what I was thinking about the situation and how I was trying to understand and solve the situation. So I don't know. What do you get from that? I think so.
Well, and I'm curious how much, because for us, we have a lot of support networks, groups, right? There's AA and NA, there's OA, there's SLAA, there's all kinds of A's out there. Yep. Was there any sort of a support group that you were able to connect with? Did you try to connect with a support group and it didn't work for you? What was your experience with support groups?
So prior to this particular turning point moment, I had done a group back in St. Louis called Shelter from the Storm back in my church days. And that book I refer to here and there throughout the Beyond Surviving Guidebook, because there were some things in that program that were really helpful. And that was, in a lot of ways, the first kind of stirrings of the idea that I might do something like this. And that was really, really helpful. I had a lot of space to talk about my experience. And And I did have some good therapists along the way, people who saw me. I think my support has most of the time come from friends. Even in the midst of this 10-year, abusive relationship, I had people around me who just kept saying, this is not you. Like, what are you doing? And they kept loving me through it, right? And taking a stand that one day I would get it and, move on and all of that. So friends have been essential. Friends have been essential to my survival. Um, there have also been some mentors along the way, both men and women, who kind of saw through all of the character and all of the kind of attitude and defenses that I walked around in life with. And they cut through it and just saw me as me and kind of parented me or loved me, and that bolstered me or carried me to the next thing that I needed to do. So yeah, support is critical. There's no way, none of us, regardless of what our situation is and why we're in it or what's happened, none of us get through life alone. We have to have people in our lives who see us and care for us and speak life, into us.
I think it's super important that to recognize that, seeking out the right people, right? Seeking out the right people, recognizing when you're headed into toxic relationships, when you're headed into people that aren't giving you what you need, especially as you're trying to navigate through this crisis, whatever crisis it is that you're going through, that because of that need, that we have to connect with others, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because we can't do it alone. So intuitively, we're going to seek people out, right? So it's important to recognize that we're seeking out the right people, which is why, I talk a lot of times in group, right? There's more than just one person. So in many cases, sometimes one-on-one becomes either a romantic relationship where you start to cling on to someone. You feel like maybe they're going to save you, right? And so then you move from one, sick relationship to another sick relationship, from one toxic situation to another, or from being lost to further into the rabbit hole. So I'm curious too, between, the fact that you say you found some good mentors, were there times along the way where you had to strip people out of your life? I'm just talking about the boyfriend or actually the husband, because you got married. How old were you when you got married?
Oh, honey, I don't. 24. I'm so bad with things like that. We were together for 7 years. We were married for 3. That's what I can tell you for sure. So somebody can do the math. 17, 26, 24.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so you get rid of him, or you're in the midst of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. What other people did you have to pull away from?
Well, so at that time we had moved to California, and we had been in California for just a year when all of this started to kind of go down in the marriage, when we started to break up and he was asking for a divorce and we were figuring all of that out. So that was 2005, and then it was a year of figuring that out, and then everything was final 2006, but I didn't move to California until 2004. So I had built some relationships and some community, but I didn't have a lot actually in my life at that time. There wasn't a real deep connections. For me, once we divorced, the place that I threw myself into was church at the time. And I just was so committed. Every single week, I started volunteering with the youth ministry. And, I think so many times giving back and being of service has been super, super healing for me. And that's actually where I got my start with Beyond Surviving. I went to the care pastor of that church, and it turned out that he had also experienced sexual abuse. And so I didn't know that when I went to sit down with him, but I just had this inkling. I had this idea of, can I can I start something? Can I put together a group for women here? I know there must be other women in this church who've gone through this. And can we just have a safe space? Can you give us a room, once a night during the week? And I'm going to take them through this program. I showed them the shelter from the storm. I said, but I've got other ideas and other things I want to do that are my own. And that's really how everything got started. I've kind of digressed from your question, so I'll come back to it. I mean, I certainly have had to, along the journey in my life, strip people out of my life. I've had to look at, I have what I call people points. So this is the framework that works for me. I have so many people points, and you really need to be worthy of my people points. And if you're not, you might be on, kind of the outer edges of my life, and I might only see you every once in a while, or I might only see you in certain context. Or if you're someone who just takes and is not feeding me or my spirit or supporting me in my life, then you don't get any people points, and I've got to cut that out. So I've had some friends who've had to go by way of that, and just some people in my life who I've had to say, yeah, I can't be in a relationship with you. I've also made errors in that. For 2 years I cut my mom out of my life. I had this idea that she was the problem, and so didn't speak to her for 2 years, and thankfully that relationship was reconciled and mended. So I've also made errors where I think this person should go, but they really shouldn't. It's this person over here. Yeah.
Did you blame your mom for what happened with you and your grandfather?
No. My relationship with my mom was trickier. It was that I didn't feel understood. And as often happens for survivors of trauma, we start asking different questions as we're 13 years old or 10 years old or whatever, and the questions that are on our mind are things like, why do bad things happen? Is there a God? And not that there aren't other kids who aren't traumatized who think about those things, but you grow up, I guess, a little too fast, and so the things that are on your mind are of that nature. And so as a 13-year-old, 14-year-old, I was reading everything that I could to try to understand God. So I was reading the Bible, I was reading the Quran, I was reading, the Buddhist text, I was reading Confucius, I was, looking at anything and everything I could get my hands on, and then just philosophy in general, Aristotle. And I would go to my mom. Now, my mom is a beautiful, amazing, kind woman, but she's also a small town country girl, or at least that was my experience of her. So I would go to her to try to talk about these things. Oh, and she would invariably say, oh, honey, those things kind of give me a headache, which I can laugh about today. But as a 14-year-old trying to find herself, feeling completely broken and alone, and like there's nobody in this world who understands me, when I would get that response from my mom, I would essentially feel like if she can't understand me, nobody's ever going to understand me. And this all came to a head in my 20s. And I'm, of course, as influenced by my abusive partner, but I was having a conversation with her, and it was another one of these conversations where I felt like she wasn't talking about anything important. Oh, look at me, I'm so full of myself, right? You're just not, don't know how to talk about anything important. I blew up at her and I said some really nasty shit, and I hung up the phone, and I just refused to talk to her. And it was years later when I was doing this work. I was on the other side of that. I was, post sleeping bag and lamp, and I was looking at a lot of the areas of my life that had been wrecked because of abuse and trauma, because of being in this abusive relationship. And mom was at the top of the list. So I had to get real busy cleaning that up. And the way I did that was I just made a commitment to call her every single week, no matter what she said, no matter what we talked about, no matter what it was. And I kept showing up as myself. I didn't change. I just let go of this idea that it meant anything, that she didn't want to talk about those sorts of things. And I have to tell you, years later, I was going through a breakup, and I was one of those, like, I'm sick of men. Why am I even trying this? This is so dumb. I'm never going to love anyone ever again kind of breakups. And I was talking to my mom, crying really and lamenting and whining, and she says, "Hold your horses, honey." In her country, hold your horses, honey. And she starts talking about her first love and how that didn't work out and how heartbroken she was. And then she starts to tell me all about this like philosophy of love that she has, and like she's breaking it down. Okay. And I'm like, who is this woman? You don't think about these things. But yes, she did. I just never created any space for her to share about those things because I was so in my judgment and in my pain and in my trauma that there was no room for her to show up for me that way. And that's one of my favorite lessons, and one of my favorite things that I get to do with my clients is really work with them and understanding how they are, first of all, defining their selves and how that impacts their life and the choices they get to make, but also how they're defining the people around them and what they might be missing out on because of that.
Dude, that's very, very powerful. And how long ago was this? It sounds like it was around the sleeping bag time that, when did that 2-year happen that you didn't speak to your mom? I know you're bad with the dates.
No, that was, I'm so bad with dates, but I'm going to say that was earlier 20s. It was still like even with the guy there, I reconnected with my mom. I said, enough of that. You're not going to have any say about that. And so, so that was more like a couple of years into dating him. I want to say like 20 to 22. It sounds about right.
And so with all of the, what I would call addictive behavior, which would be the food, the cutting, the numbing, the TV, whatever the case may be, right? How long did that go on before you finally realized that you were caught in a cycle of negative behavior?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I was starting to understand it by my early 20s. It's kind of one of those crazy things, like the abusive asshole also is the one who got me to face my shit. Right? So I have to give him some props for that. I wish he had done it in different ways. But he really did say, look, got you've got some stuff there that I don't know how to handle. I don't know how to deal with it. You need to get some support and talk to some people. And so it was during that time in kind of my early 20s in working with a therapist that I started to understand. I really was in that survivor stage, what I think of as the second stage of healing, which is the survivor stage, where we're beginning to understand and talk about our experience. And so I began to look at the behaviors and the choices that I was making in my life and where they were deriving from. And so, my going to the McDonald's drive-through to get like a 10-piece nugget, 3 cheeseburgers, a soda, and sundae, that was not because I was hungry, right? But it didn't, but I was like, what are you talking about? I remember the therapist being like, what are you talking about? I'm just hungry. He's like, let's just take a look. Let's go a different way. He was like, okay. He just let me be in that for a little bit. He kept kind of nudging it. And it has taken work to unravel that and to repair my relationship with food and my body and what it means to be healthy, all of those things. And of course, this is not uncommon. So many of survivors of abuse and trauma end up either on the spectrum of not eating, right, anorexia, bulimia, or overeating and using food as a way to not just control and manage emotions, but also trying to control what's happening in your external world and what kinds of interactions or experiences you're having when you're just even like walking out on the street, and what the perception of what it means to feel safe or be safe because of the way you look. We have a lot of ideas in this culture. They're all wrong, but we still have them as far as what a victim looks like. And so particularly men and women really will add weight as a way to feel bigger, safer, stronger, these sorts of things.
Okay, so that's really what I was getting at as well, right? It's a defense mechanism to protect yourself, right? So you defend yourself because you said you were either blaming your body or angry with your body. At some point, you mentioned something. I think
Yeah.
you said blaming your body, like
Yeah.
it's this is it's because I'm a woman or something, or what was that like?
Well, as soon as trauma, as soon as abuse starts, the brain, we try to understand why. I mean, that really goes for any experience we have, but particularly a trauma experience, we want to explain it. We want to understand it. And mostly we want to explain it and understand it because then if I know what caused this, well, I will just avoid doing that. And then none of this shit will ever happen to me again.
Mm-hmm.
And so, some of the early decisions that I made about why the abuse and trauma happened to me, one was because I was cuddly. I shouldn't have been cuddling, right?
Wow. Yes.
And then, for a long time in my life, accessing cuddling, being like, no way, man, stay away. I couldn't do it, or I would do it, but it would be fake, right? I would be forcing my way through it. Certainly, this feeling of if I didn't have a body in general can sometimes be a thing, like just a physicality. I wish I didn't even exist, but also I have a female body.
Mm-hmm.
And so a female body that is attractive and desirable, as determined by our society, it changes all the time, but in our current society looks a particular way, namely very slim right now, though thank goodness that's starting to change. And so when I thought about how do I protect myself in the world from future trauma, I was like, well, don't look like a girl. Don't be feminine. Don't have, cover it all up, or be, the fat chick that everyone makes fun of instead of, wants to go out on a date with. And so, but you know what's really amazing about that though, too? Oh, I was looking back at some pictures recently of my 16-year-old self, and I was like, I was not fat at all. But like in my head and in my physical experience, um, I was big, right? And so a lot of my work has been about getting the internal to match the external, right?
Mm.
Like now, like the internal is super, super healthy. Back then, the external was actually fairly healthy, but the internal was a mess, right? And now the internal is super, super healthy, and the external is awesome and could, go for a couple more walks. So and so but it's been interesting because it's really been an interesting just journey with my body. I think my body as a woman, my body as a survivor of sexual abuse, where parts of my body have been touched and tortured and traumatized and used for the pleasure of another person without my choice, via obligation.
Mm-hmm.
Unpacking all of that, and then coming into just like ownership and contentment with my body as it is today, no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
And then healthy, like what does just healthy look like, period. So I mean, this is where I know early on in my years when I was healing, these are often the moments where I would go, oh my gosh, there's so much to figure out. Like it almost starts to feel so heavy, like I've got to unpack that, and I've got to unpack this, and oh yeah, I've got to figure that piece out, and what about that? So I just want to name that for anybody who's listening right here in this moment who might be experiencing some of that, because I know what that's like, to have it feel like there's all these different problems. And I think that's part of the reason why, for me, I ended up developing my work in the way that I did. I had to break it down. I had to figure out, like, what's the first smallest thing that has to be in place? Okay, now that I've got that, what's the next little piece that I can do? Because if we try to just kind of throw that door open that has all the shit that we've been trying to avoid, or we're not sure about, or we haven't been able to figure out, we just fling that door open and are like, okay, bring it on. It's painful. It's too painful. It's re-traumatizing, and it doesn't work anyway. So I think this happens for men too. I want to name this as well, that men who experience sexual abuse also have body image and body dysmorphia, and using food It's regardless of gender. And so, yeah, it's one of the biggest ways that we are impacted, I think, by abuse trauma, the loss of our body.
I think this is, and I'm speculating, obviously, but the idea of what we put into our body, what it does for us, and that I think that maybe the drugs and the alcohol prevent me from being in my full faculties. And I am constantly needing to be on ready alert just in case. I need to watch what's happening at all times. And drugs and alcohol is just going to make it easier for someone to take advantage of me. So maybe subconsciously on a subconscious level, I need to stay away from that. But food, right? That's not going to change my ability to be aware.
Yeah.
Right?
That's
it's
right.
only
That's
it,
right.
but it could protect me.
Yeah.
It could protect me.
Yeah, I mean, it's all a false sense of security, though. I mean, like
Yes, of
everything we
course.
do,
Mhm.
everything we do is a false sense of security. So even if we have this idea, well, I won't drink or drug because then I'll be super aware. Well, guess what? Men and women are raped and abused every day who aren't drugged or
Mhm.
inebriated. Okay, I'm gonna get super, super fat, so nothing bad happens. Well, guess what? Fat people get abused too, right?
Mhm.
So, but yet we continue these myths, and I think that's part of my work is dispelling that there's anything that we do to cause the abuse and anything that we can do to eliminate abuse. And I'm using a very specific word there, eliminate abuse. We can do things to minimize and reduce abuse, but they need to be the right things. And eating McDonald's is not one of them.
Well, in that case, let's dive into, on your website it says you have the 3 stages of recovery from childhood abuse, right? And I think that not necessarily even, right? Like when I went through my own coaching, right? Before I became a coach, I went to a coach, right? And it was through going through my own coaching that I realized I wanted to be a coach, because it completely changed my life. I had unresolved childhood issues and trauma that were not sexual. They weren't even physical, right? It was all emotional and mental, right? Just from not understanding what in the fuck was going on with my parents. Okay. So I had to figure out what was up with me. So anyway, there was a lot of that growing and changing that I had to discover. And I did that with my coach. But can you speak a little bit about what these 3 stages of recovery that from childhood abuse are?
Yeah, for sure. So one of the things that I like to try to do for myself is create frameworks for understanding. It just helps me to put things into categories while also understanding that there's wiggle room here. So as I talk about this, I'm going to talk about it in a very linear way, but healing isn't necessarily linear. So keep that in mind. But it still helps us to kind of frame and understand where we are. The victim stage is the first stage. This is the stage when we are either still being victimized, we're actually being abused, or we're in an abusive relationship, or we are at a place of denial about the abuse experience that we've gone through. That's really where I was from, like my 10 years old to early 20s. I don't want to talk about this. It's no big deal. What do you mean? I'm fine. All of this is normal. You're the problem. Like all of that stuff. Oh man. And just like I'm putting that in the corner. I'm putting it in the corner more. I'm pushing it away. I'm pushing it away. And when we hit whatever place we hit, we say, wow, you know what? Actually, all of these experiences that I've had are impacting my life. And I have to take a look at it. I'm going to have to deal with it. I'm not going to get out of it by just continuing to ignore it. So that action of acknowledgement is your bridge to the second stage, which is survivor. It is through the act of acknowledgement that you move from victim to survivor. Once you're in the survivor stage, your work becomes all about naming, understanding, of course, further acknowledging your experiences. That's when you're sitting in therapy and you're in your groups, or you're in your AA meetings, or you're wherever you are, friends, at the beach talking to the water. I don't care where it is, but you're naming it, you're expressing it. You're starting to understand the impact. Oh, the reason why I don't trust anyone and why I feel so isolated and lonely is because I'm afraid to trust anyone, because I was hurt by somebody who I really loved and cared about. Oh, the reason why I go into all these fits of rage is because I don't feel safe in the world. And the only way I know to get attention or try to protect myself is to rage and throw Tupperware. That was my thing. Whatever it is, right? It's the unpacking of it in a safe space, beginning to name, acknowledge, and talk about. That is when therapy is really great. Therapists are amazing, good therapists anyway, are magical at creating this little cocoon that you get to walk into and just talk about whatever you need to talk about and spew it out. It doesn't have to be in any order. It doesn't have to be chronological. It doesn't have to be logical. It can just come out. And they can reflect back to you, and they can help you begin to see things and make these connections. Once you've done that for some time and you have a deeper understanding, you start to get some of the lingo, PTSD, flashbacks. This is also, I sometimes describe as your season of becoming book smart about trauma. You're getting your head wrapped around it. Oh, I might be bipolar. Oh, I might have BPD. Like all of that stuff, even if you're not into diagnosing, which I'm only barely, just understanding it. Once you hit a point where you're like, God, I understand all this. I feel like I've talked about this thing, up one side and down the other. And yeah, some things are getting better. Some things are kind of shifting, but I'm just not really feeling the way I want to feel or living the way I want to live. That's really when you're hitting the turning point to move from the survivor to what I call the beyond surviving stage. And the bridge from survivor to beyond survivor depends on whether you want to say it the nice way or the not nice way. So the nice way is it's enough is enough, right? The not so nice way is fuck all this shit. I'm getting on with my life. And so when you get to that place, it stops being about talking about the trauma, reflecting on the trauma, looking for little insights about the trauma, and every single thing becomes about one question: what do I do about that? What do I do about that? Okay, I don't trust anyone. What do I do about that? Okay, I have all this anger. What do I do about that? I dissociate and space out all the time. What do I do about that? And so the type of support you want to get when you're ready for that stage is going to be different. Some therapists can do this work, not many. That's changing a little bit now. It certainly was not the case when I started this work 11 years ago, which is exactly why I went into coaching and not therapy. Because the place and the stage where I'm most interested in helping people is in the what do I do about it stage. So you're looking at strategies, tools, interventions, skills. And through doing that work, all beyond surviving really means to me is that you are complete about the past so that it is no longer constantly interfering with your present. Your time in recovery is done. Your time in being alive and growing and learning new things and continuing to develop as a human being is not done, but your time in recovery is done.
I love it. I love it. That is fantastic. So, and what I love here too is because I recently had this conversation too, because a lot of times it comes up. It's like, yeah, I was reading about pause, right? Post-acute withdrawal syndrome that they talk about. And then there's the PTSD, and then there's the bipolar. And I say, look, a lot of times we're looking to understand, which is great, right? The quest for knowledge. I want to understand what's wrong with me.
Right.
But then, do I want to live there? Right? Now I can, that's what it is. And now all of a sudden I have an identity. Yeah, but I have PTSD. Now I stop being Steve or Carol or Brian or whoever, and I start being a person with PTSD.
Yes, that's right.
Which is, this is part of the survivor stage, correct?
Yeah.
Where you
Yeah.
understand. Okay, so now I understand what's going on with me, right? Now let's get past that. Now that you recognize that we can put a name to what you're feeling, what this emotional state is,
Mm-hmm.
where the ups and downs are, so we get an idea. So now how do we move past that? Because
That's right.
once we recognize it, this acknowledgement, which I refer to as awareness,
Mm-hmm. Yep.
right? So, and then I love it. What do we do about it? So
That's
now
it.
that so
Yeah.
important,
Yeah.
because it's real easy to attach ourselves to an identity, because now I have something to blame and I can just sit there and
Yeah.
just not do shit.
Yeah. Which is exactly why the first two stages are labels, nouns, and the last stage is a verb. It's about living.
Mm.
It's about action. It's about lifestyle. It's about behavior. It's not a label. It's not a way of defining yourself. And that, I'll say to my clients, talking about and understanding trauma is not the same as healing trauma.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We have to move from that book smart space to the street smart space and get those applications, get those tools, get those, build your toolkit of strategies that help you, complete this trauma and heal this wound so you can go out and live your life. That's the end of it. Like I say, beyond surviving is a lifestyle. Just like if somebody's likes to exercise and run marathons, that's a lifestyle. They need to do something every day, right? They eat a certain way, they
Mm-hmm.
walk a certain way, they exercise a certain way. If we're going to live as people who are healthy and whole, and connected and interconnected, it's lifestyle. And so our mental health, right? Continuing to do tune-ups, with our brain, keeping our emotional health in order, expressing ourselves, taking self-care, building relationships, building community. That's how, we move out of the past and we move out of the trauma, and life stops being about the trauma, right? And it just is about living your life and having your friends and your lovers and your whatever, doing the things that you love to do.
So now that we've moved past the idea, once we've identified that we have created an identity around this trauma, right? So
Yeah.
what are the first things that you tell people to do? What are the first, and it might be just case by case, but is there anything in particular that you can throw out to our audience?
Yeah, well, so one of the most important things is being able to regulate your nervous system and understanding how to take charge of your trauma brain. To my mind, in the Beyond Surviving program, there are 7 modules, and the first module is a boot camp for the brain. And the reason being is that I feel like a lot of times what happens is people have their presenting problem, if you want to use clinical terms, right? They have the thing that is bugging them the most, right? My relationships are out of whack. I can't have sex. I feel alone. Whatever, I'm depressed. And so you go into the practitioner's office and you bring your concerns, as you should. But most practitioners, at least in the therapy world, will just say, okay, let's work on that. What I say is, great, got it, we'll get there. Because without foundational tools and skills for regulating your nervous system, and all I mean by that, folks, is just the fight, flight, freeze response system. If you're easily triggered, if you go into panic attacks, if you have PTSD that's not under control or eliminated, then how dare I ask you to go into any of the hard spaces in your life without those tools? I think it's re-traumatizing. I think it should be illegal. I'm going to get me on my soapbox here in a minute. Oh my gosh. So that's, for me, where we always start. Understand how your brain has been impacted by trauma. Understand how your brain is working and operating as a survivor of trauma. Understand what you can do about that. What are the interventions? What are the strategies that you need to use to retrain the brain, to heal the brain, and to reset your nervous system? All of these are so interconnected.
Beautiful, beautiful. So what I want to do is I want to start closing down, because some of these closing questions are going to be about suggestions to our listeners, right? So first of all, the first question I asked my guests typically is, what was keeping you from getting clean or staying clean when you first got introduced to recovery? In this particular case, I guess it would be, what was keeping you from recovering from the sexual abuse, right? Once you recognized that there was something wrong, right? Was there something that was preventing you from actually diving in?
Yeah, I'll share just what the first word was that came to mind when you were prompting that question, which was deserving. I think there was such an ingrained belief that I didn't deserve. I could almost just say period, like I didn't deserve. You could put anything after that sentence. I didn't deserve love. I didn't deserve attention, understanding, compassion, help, support, care, to be better. I had such a deep belief that I did not deserve, that it stopped me over and over and over again from reaching out for support or taking advantage of what was being offered to me by the people around me who really loved me.
Wow. I'm so glad I asked you that question. That is what, for me, the thing that is so difficult for so many of my clients is, and we started this interview, right, with the word that caught my attention the most, which was that feeling of being worthless. And when I am feeling worthless, when I don't have value, then how could I possibly feel deserving of ... And you just fill in the blank, because I just can't feel deserving of anything.
Yeah.
And I think it's so important to recognize that, man, if you're listening to this right now and you have a resistance to change, you have resistance to recovery, you have a resistance to reach out and ask for help, it may just be that somewhere inside of you, unconsciously, you don't feel deserving. And every single one of us has been there, and we've pushed through it. And on the other side, we realized, oh my God, that was it.
Mm-hmm.
How could I possibly delve into something so powerful? How could I ask for help? How could I expect someone to listen to me when I don't deserve it? Right? This is such a powerful message, right? And if you're listening, good thing we're here. You can reach out to Rachel or me. We are here for you.
Yes. Yes,
So,
for sure.
And so let's dive into the next part of that segment, which is, at what point did you have your spiritual awakening, that aha moment in recovery, when you accepted that you were powerless over this sexual abuse, but for the first time you developed the hope that you could recover?
It was about a year after the divorce, and I had been in the out dating. I was like, whoa, I don't know what I'm doing. Oh my gosh. And it was really fascinating because the first boy I dated out of after my divorce, he helped remind me that I could have better standards. We were out one night and he like opened the door, little things. And I was like, oh, I was like gushing. I was like, oh my God, this is so amazing. And he looks at me and he says, Rachel, this is just the entry point. This is just the standard. And I was like, what? Okay. All right. I'm going to take that. I'm going to take that in. I'm really going to own that, that was helping me with my deservingness. Right. And also understanding what it was that I really wanted to look for or have in a partner. And then the next person I dated, he just, kind of wrapped me up in fun and play. And life didn't have to be this super serious, heavy thing. And I just laughed. I mean, I laughed so much with this person. And he helped me reconnect with that part of myself. I remember my mom one time, she looked at me and said, you don't ever laugh anymore. And so it was about a year after this, I was talking with my mom and we were goofing off. And I think that, these two guys had just helped heal me in some certain ways. And there was other stuff going on, but that's really what I'm wanting to highlight in this moment. And I was telling my mom some story and just laughing. And she just looked at me and said, wow, there's my Rachel.
Wow.
Yeah.
That must have been, what were the emotions that you felt in that moment?
Man, you didn't tell me I was going to cry today. Oh, yeah,
I'm good at that.
Every coach says, if you ain't crying, you ain't healing.
Yes!
Oh, man. Yes. Oh, it was just, it's like I could breathe. I could breathe again. Wow. And it was like, right, okay, this person that I am is and was never gone. She just got covered up by a whole bunch of bullshit. And I am doing my work to remove that. I'm taking those pieces off. I tell my clients all the time, healing and recovery is as much about unlearning as it is about learning. Wow. And I was unlearning all of the lies. And I was coming back into myself. And it was in that moment, I just felt such a deep love and connection with my mom. And I felt joy. I felt relief. Oh my gosh, okay, it's possible. It's real. Okay, this is working. Jubilant. I just was ecstatic and grateful. I was grateful because, I had a little glimmer in that moment. I had no idea what it was going to become. I had no idea it was going to look like this. But I had a little glimmer in that moment, too, that I'm not special. All I'm doing is asking questions and focusing on very specific things. And there's nothing special about me. Anybody can do that. And so this can make a difference. This can put an end. I sometimes get really big, lofty dreams, but I love them. This can put an end to sexual abuse and trauma being a life sentence for people. And I battle that every day, talking to people and saying, no, like your life doesn't have to be this way. I know what it's like. I know it feels like it, but it doesn't. And let me show you the way. Let me support you, or let me help you find the people who will show you the way if my way doesn't work for you.
Well, we're doing that work now. We're doing work that wasn't available to our parents. It's certainly not our grandparents, right? There was no such thing as a coach back then, unless it was on a soccer team.
Soccer field.
You know what I mean? Right, exactly.
Yes,
so
that's right.
Coach,
yeah.
And there was a different mindset. And so the whole idea, right, of healing and communicating and being vulnerable did not exist, right? One of the most powerful interviews I had was with my buddy Ken Revord, and he talked about how he was sexually abused for years as a child, and he realized that he said this. He goes, hurt people hurt people.
Yeah. Right.
And when you break that cycle, right, and someone comes to you that's been hurt by hurt people, that eventually they could end up hurting people if they're not already. Once we clear this, once the work is done, the cycle ends. So I don't think it's a lofty goal at all. I think it's very realistic that all of us that are on this path of wellness and healing will now break this cycle, right?
Yeah.
In and of itself for ourselves. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I did everything raising my daughter. I remember my mom and I got into an argument too, talking about raising my daughter. And she was criticizing how I raise her. I said, well, of course you would criticize how I would raise her. I basically took everything, your whole strategy for parenting, and I just did the opposite.
Right.
I just like whatever you did,
not doing that.
You were doing, I just did the opposite. That was my coping skills for being a parent, right? I just remember the look on her face, like I don't even know how to respond,
right? Good for
to
you.
this, but it was like, no, I'm not going to perpetuate this, right? Yeah, 33 years of marriage of two people who hated each other, lived in separate bedrooms, threw stuff at each other, right? And we're constantly arguing. Yeah, that I'm going to take some direction there. And it was just, that's like you say, first that pushback comes. And once we take our power back, we get a little aggressive, right?
Yeah.
Once we settle into it, right, we can be a little bit more loving with how we set our boundaries. But at first, we set our boundaries strong.
Oh, yeah, we sure do. Yeah. Which means, like, you've been keeping me silent all this time. Let me let you hear my voice for a little minute. Yeah, exactly. We get a little attitude about it. It's true. And that is it. We pendulum swing. And then we find our center. We find our grounding. And it is so beautiful in that space. And I love my clients so much because they are breaking these cycles, and they're shifting and changing their lives. And then they're going out and they're sharing it with others, which I love, right? Passing it down. We can get there. It just takes, one person at a time having the support and care they need, to face their shit and to handle it. And, it takes a village sometimes, but we can't give up. We just can't give up because there's so much beauty in this life, as much as there are so many things right now in the world that are terrifying and terrible. If we just look around and we look at each other in the eyes, you see there's spirit, there's love, no matter what our beliefs are. And if we can keep connecting back to that and allow that to drive our choices, we can put an end to this harm and this trauma that we cause each other.
Yes, I am certain of it. I am certain of it. It's just not overnight, just like anything else, right?
Yeah.
But for me, it's all about, Gandhi. Just be the change you want to see in the world. That's all. That's all I can do. I can just be the change I want to see in the world. So tell us, Rachel, do you have tell us your favorite books, right, that you would recommend to our listeners.
Gosh.
Right.
Now you're talking to an English major, so how much time do you have? Oh my Lord, you can't crack that open. You can't crack that open in 1 minute. Oh my gosh. Okay, well, first of all, The Never-Ending Story is a must-read for everyone because it tells you everything you need to know on how to succeed in life. And from there, I would say The Way of the Peaceful Warrior by Dan Millman. Huge. Such an impactful story in my own journey. Of course, I love my book for survivors, Beyond Surviving, The Final Stage in Recovery from Sexual Abuse. But I also love authors like Dan Siegel, Peter Levine, Bessel van der Kolk. You're going to learn some really great stuff from those folks. Just go to rachelgrantcoaching.com/resources and you'll find everything that I love. That's really the easiest way because I read as much as I possibly can. I try to filter content for my community and bring forward the things that I think are the best that are out there and on various topics. So whether it's anger, anxiety, depression, suicidality, sexuality, you can find all sorts of resources at that site.
Beautiful. So let's just finish that thought with how's the best way for our listeners to find you, get in touch with you, all of your website, social media. How can they connect with you?
Awesome. So easiest, fastest way is rachelgrantcoaching.com.
Mm-hmm.
You'll find a link there to get the checklist about the 3 stages so you can assess where you are in your journey. You can also apply there for a Discover Your Genuine Self session if you'd like to explore enrolling in the Beyond Surviving program. And then click over on the resources link and you'll find all sorts of freebies, links to my monthly support group, which is donation based. Nobody turned away for a lack of resources. My podcast you can get to, my YouTube channel, oh gosh, the Facebook group, the blog, there's so many things, master classes. So yep, go check that out and tool around, and I look forward to connecting with anyone and being of a resource and support to anyone who I can be.
Question I forgot to ask you as you were mentioning it. How many people are in that Facebook group?
Right now, I think we're at like 4,200.
Oh, look at you. We're at... No, because here's the thing. Because you were saying that you're getting like 150 a month. What was it?
Yeah, about that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, and I just hit 5,200 on my group.
Yes, nice.
And I get between 120, 150 a month as well. So we're grooving.
Growing.
We're right in that. We're getting to that sweet spot right there. But it's amazing.
You need to add me to your group. Send me your info.
All right. Do I have you on Facebook yet?
I don't know.
Pretty sure I am. All right. Well,
we'll figure it out.
No, I'm doing it right now. So okay. So 2 more questions.
No time like the present.
Right.
Yeah, man.
What is the best suggestion you have ever received?
Just in life? Or about sexual abuse? In life, the best suggestion you've ever received. Well, one day I was 8 years old, and it was back in the days when I don't know if they still have these because I don't really watch the TV on the cable anymore. But anyway, back when they had those children are starving in Ethiopia commercials. Do you remember those, Omar?
Oh yeah, it was wasn't it what's her name that was doing those? Oh my God, I forget her name. There was anyway, I know which ones you're talking about. Starving it. There was a ton of that.
Yep, a ton of that. So I was sitting there and I was just in tears watching this commercial. And my mom rolls in. I guess my mom's really on my mind today. My mom rolls in and she's, honey, what's the matter? Why are you crying? And I was like, there are people starving. I don't understand why they're starving. Let's get our food. Like I went over to the fridge. I'm like, let's get all our food. Let's go. And she sits me down and she says, Rachel, honey, there are a lot of big problems, and there are a lot of people who are hurt. You cannot save them all, but you can help whoever is in front of you at any given time. Just one person. Help the one person who's in front of you at any given moment. And that has been just a huge guiding principle in my life. You know, I go into the space, in the emotional space of wanting to change the world and wanting to put an end to the epidemic of sexual abuse and what that would mean and how many people. And then I just breathe in and I take my mom's words back to heart and I just focus, okay, who's in front of me right this minute? And give them love, give them encouragement, give them guidance, and get that from the people in your life too, right? We need that balance. Can't all be giving out. But I would say that's really been one of the most impactful guiding principles in my life.
That is beautiful and so simple.
Yeah.
I think with it, which is we overcomplicate our lives, right? Be the change you want to see in the world. So that's all about you, right? And then just focus on the person that's in front of you.
Yeah.
Right? It's help one person at a time. It's absolutely beautiful. I love it. All right. So if you could give our listeners only one suggestion, well, for you, it could be multiple. If you could give our listeners only one suggestion, what would that be?
Eat peanut butter ice cream. That's I have to go there. Yeah.
That's my favorite suggestion of all time.
You're welcome.
Peanut butter ice cream. I've never eaten peanut butter ice cream.
Yes. Find it, get it in your life. It's a good thing.
I'm getting it. I am getting it, right? I eat peanut butter every day. I'm a peanut butteraholic, right? Don't know why I've never tried the ice cream. Well, I try and avoid the ice cream. Yeah. Absolutely. Rachel, this has been amazing.
Yeah, thank you so much. Oh, I've had such a good time with you today. I really appreciate it.
It's been my honor and a privilege to have you on the show. So again,
thank you. Take care, everybody.
All right. So we've now reached the end of our show. Thanks for joining us. And as we say here in Costa Rica, pura vida.
For life. Isn't that right?
It's pure life, but that was very close. Give us a pura vida.
Pura vida.
Hey, perfect. And that's a wrap.